September 11th, 2001. A Tuesday morning that started just like any other day in New York City. People were heading to work, kids were going to school, coffee shops were full, the streets of Manhattan were alive with the ordinary rhythm of life. And then, at 8:46 in the morning, everything changed. Not just for America, for the entire world. What happened on that day reshaped global politics, launched 2 decades of war, and left a wound in history that the world will never fully forget. Today, we are going to walk through the full story of September 11th, 2001, from the very beginning to the devastating end and everything that came after. This is the complete history of 9/11. To truly understand what happened on September 11th, we first need to understand the world that existed before it. The United States in the year 2001 was at the peak of its power. The Cold War had ended more than a decade earlier. The economy was strong. America felt safe, protected by 2 vast oceans on either side, and a military stronger than any in history. But in the shadows of that confidence, a storm was building. Throughout the 1990s, a terrorist organization called Al-Qaeda had been growing in strength and ambition. Al-Qaeda, which means the base in Arabic, was founded by a Saudi-born militant named Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden came from an extremely wealthy family, but he had dedicated his life to a radical and violent ideology, one that called for war against the United States, and what he called Western influence in Muslim lands. Al-Qaeda had already struck before. In 1993, a group of terrorists connected to bin Laden's network bombed the World Trade Center in New York. 6 people died, and over 1,000 were injured, but the towers did not fall. In 1998, Al-Qaeda bombed the United States embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing over 200 people. In 2000, they attacked the USS Cole, a U.S. Navy ship in Yemen, killing 17 American sailors. Attack was a test. Each attack told Al-Qaeda that large-scale operations against America were possible. And so, they began planning something much bigger. The idea for the September 11th attacks was not born overnight. It took years of planning, financing, and preparation. The mastermind behind the operational planning was a man named Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, also known as KSM. He had first proposed the idea of using hijacked commercial airplanes as weapons to Osama bin Laden in 1996. Bin Laden approved the plan and provided funding. KSM began putting it into motion. The plan was called the Planes Operation. Over the next several years, Al-Qaeda recruited and trained a group of men, mostly young, educated Saudi men, who would become the 19 hijackers. They were sent to flight schools in the United States. They learned how to fly commercial aircraft. They studied American airports and airline schedules. They opened bank accounts, rented apartments, and lived quietly among ordinary Americans while preparing for mass murder. The hijackers were divided into 4 teams, 1 for each plane. Mohammed Atta, an Egyptian national who had trained as a pilot, was selected as the lead hijacker and overall operational commander on the ground. By the summer of 2001, the operation was nearly ready. American intelligence agencies were picking up signals that something big was coming. The CIA had warned in August 2001 that bin Laden was determined to strike in the United States. But the specific nature and timing of the attack remained unknown. And so the morning of September 11th arrived, and with it, catastrophe. Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, began as a clear, beautiful morning on the east coast of the United States. The sky was deep blue, the air was crisp. It was the kind of morning that makes you feel good to be alive. At airports in Boston, Newark, and Washington, D.C., 4 commercial flights were boarding passengers for routine cross-country journeys. The 19 hijackers moved through airport security checkpoints and boarded their assigned planes. They carried box cutters and knives, weapons that were, at the time, technically permitted on flights. Some had received additional hand-to-hand combat training. They were prepared, they were calm, and they were ready to die. American Airlines. Flight 11 departed Boston's Logan Airport at 7:59 a.m., headed for Los Angeles. It carried 92 people, 81 passengers, 11 crew members, and 5 hijackers. United Airlines Flight 175 also departed from Logan Airport at 8:14 a.m., also headed for Los Angeles. It carried 65 people, 56 passengers, 9 crew members, and 5 hijackers. American Airlines Flight 77 departed Washington Dulles International Airport at 8:20 a.m., also bound for Los Angeles. It carried 64 people, 58 passengers, 6 crew members, and 5 hijackers. United Airlines Flight 93 departed Newark Liberty International Airport at 8:42 a.m., heading for San Francisco. It carried 44 people, 37 passengers, 7 crew members, and 4 hijackers. All 4 planes were long-distance flights, meaning they were loaded with large amounts of fuel. That fuel would become their most destructive weapon. Shortly after takeoff on each flight, the hijackers moved. They stormed the cockpits, killed or incapacitated the pilots, and took control of the aircraft. On some flights, they told passengers there was a bomb on board and that the plane was being taken back to the airport. On others, they simply overpowered the crew. The hijackers then reprogrammed the navigation systems and turned the planes around, pointing them toward targets in New York City and Washington, D.C. The clock was ticking. At 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time, American Airlines, Flight 11, traveling at roughly 440 miles per hour, struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center between floors 93 and 99. The impact was devastating. The plane tore through the building, instantly killing everyone on board and destroying multiple floors. Jet fuel ignited massive fires that burned at extreme temperatures. The upper floors of the tower were immediately cut off. The stairwells destroyed, the elevators gone. Anyone above the point of impact had no way out. At first, many people on the ground thought it was a terrible accident, a small plane that had gone horribly off course. News cameras rushed to the scene. Television networks began live coverage. Millions of Americans sat down to watch what they assumed was a tragic but isolated disaster. They had no idea what was coming next. Inside the North Tower, survivors below the crash zone began evacuating. Firefighters rushed in. First responders set up command posts. There was chaos, smoke, and confusion, but also courage. Hundreds of firefighters, police officers, and emergency responders ran toward the burning building while everyone else ran away. Then at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 appeared on the horizon and crashed directly into the South Tower between floors 77 and 85 at a speed of approximately 540 miles per hour. This was no accident. The entire world watched in real time as the second plane hit. The fireball erupted from the tower. The shockwave rolled down the streets of Manhattan. And in that terrible moment, the world understood. America was under attack. While New York City burned, the third hijacked plane was closing in on Washington, D.C. American Airlines Flight 77, now under the control of the hijackers, had turned around over the Midwest and was heading back east at full speed. At 9:37 a.m., it struck the western facade of the Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States military, at a speed of approximately 530 miles per hour. The impact killed all 64 people on board the plane and 125 military and civilian personnel inside the building. The western section of the Pentagon collapsed. Fires burned for days. The Pentagon, the very symbol of American military power, had been attacked on American soil for the first time in history. In Washington, panic spread rapidly. The White House was evacuated. The Capitol building was evacuated. Fighter jets were scrambled into the air. Vice President Dick Cheney was rushed into a secure underground bunker. President George W. Bush, who was visiting a school in Sarasota, Florida when the attacks began, was quickly moved to Air Force One. For a brief and terrifying time, the leadership of the United States government was scattered and the nation's capital was in a state of emergency. And there was still a fourth plane in the air. United Airlines Flight 93 had taken off from Newark with a 41-minute delay. That delay saved countless lives. Because of that extra time, passengers on Flight 93 were able to use their phones to call family members in the outside world. And through those calls, they learned the truth. They learned that other hijacked planes had already been crashed into buildings. They understood that they were not going to land safely. They understood that their plane was a weapon, and they decided to fight back. Passengers including Todd Beamer, Mark Bingham, Tom Burnett, and Jeremy Glick, along with others, made a decision that showed extraordinary courage. They voted, literally voted among themselves, to storm the cockpit and take back the plane. Todd Beamer's words, overheard by a phone operator, became one of the defining phrases of that day. "Are you guys ready? Let's roll." The passengers rushed the cockpit. A violent struggle took place. The hijackers, realizing they were losing control, began rolling the plane from side to side and pitching it up and down in an attempt to throw the passengers off their feet. Black box recordings captured the chaos, the shouting, the struggle, the sounds of the passengers fighting to the end. At 10:03 a.m., United Flight 93 crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. 20 minutes flying time from Washington, D.C. All 44 people on board were killed. But the passengers of Flight 93 had succeeded. Their target, believed to be either the United States Capitol or the White House, was spared. Their sacrifice saved hundreds, possibly thousands of lives on the ground. They are remembered as heroes, because they were. Back in New York, the worst was still unfolding. The fires burning inside the Twin Towers were catastrophic. The jet fuel from the planes burned at temperatures hot enough to weaken the structural steel of the buildings. Engineers later explained that the steel did not melt, but it did soften and lose strength under the intense heat, eventually reaching a point where it could no longer support the weight above. At 9:59 a.m., just 56 minutes after being struck, the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. The massive structure came down in a matter of seconds, sending a towering cloud of dust and debris rolling through the streets of Lower Manhattan like a tsunami. People ran for their lives. The cloud swallowed entire city blocks. Those caught in it could not breathe, could not see, could not hear anything above the roar. Then at 10:28 a.m., 102 minutes after the first impact, the North Tower collapsed as well. Both towers, 110 stories each among the tallest buildings in the world, were gone. In their place was a smoking pile of rubble that would smolder for months. A graveyard buried under millions of tons of steel and concrete. 2,177 people died in the attacks that day, in New York at the Pentagon, and on the 4 planes. They came from over 90 countries. They were office workers, firefighters, police officers, janitors, executives, tourists, and first responders. They ranged in age from 2 to 85. They were people with families, with dreams, with futures that were stolen from them in a single morning. In addition to the victims, 343 New York City firefighters and 72 law enforcement officers were killed. Men and women who ran into the buildings knowing the danger and who gave their lives trying to save others. In the hours and days that followed September 11th, America and the world tried to process what had happened. President Bush addressed the nation that evening from the Oval Office. He declared that the United States had been attacked by terrorism, and he vowed that the country would not be defeated. In New York City, an extraordinary thing happened. A city known for its toughness and independence came together in grief and solidarity, unlike anything seen in modern times. People lined up for blocks to donate blood. Candlelight vigils filled parks and plazas. The faces of the missing covered walls and lampposts throughout Manhattan. Firefighters and rescue workers worked around the clock at Ground Zero, the site where the towers had stood, searching for survivors, and later for remains. Around the world, nations expressed shock and sympathy. Even countries with complicated relationships with the United States offered condolences. French newspaper Le Monde ran the headline, "We are all Americans." NATO invoked Article 5 of its treaty for the first time in history, declaring that an attack on one member nation was an attack on all. But the grief quickly turned to determination. Within days, investigators had identified the 19 hijackers and traced their connections to Al-Qaeda. The United States government made clear that it held both Al-Qaeda and the Taliban government of Afghanistan, which had sheltered bin Laden, responsible for the attacks. On September 20th, President Bush addressed a joint session of Congress in one of the most watched speeches in American history. He issued a direct demand to the Taliban: hand over Osama bin Laden and shut down Al-Qaeda's training camps. The Taliban refused. On October 7th, 2001, less than a month after the attacks, the United States and its allies launched military operations in Afghanistan. The war on terror had begun. The consequences of September 11th reshaped the world in ways that are still being felt today. The war in Afghanistan lasted nearly 20 years, becoming the longest war in American history. The Taliban was removed from power in 2001, but never fully defeated. Al-Qaeda's network was severely disrupted, but the ideology it represented spread and evolved into new forms. American and coalition forces fought on for 2 decades before the U.S. finally withdrew in August 2021, and the Taliban returned to power within days. At home, the United States government underwent the largest restructuring of its national security apparatus since World War II. The Department of Homeland Security was created. The USA Patriot Act was passed, giving law enforcement expanded surveillance powers. Airport security was transformed overnight. The TSA was created. Full body scanners appeared. Liquids were restricted. Shoes had to be removed. Flying was never the same again. The attacks also sparked intense debates about civil liberties, the surveillance of Muslim communities, and the balance between security and freedom, debates that continue to this day. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq, a decision that was partially justified by claims, later proven false, that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and had links to Al-Qaeda. The Iraq War killed tens of thousands of people, destabilized the region, and remains one of the most controversial foreign policy decisions in modern American history. The hunt for Osama bin Laden continued for nearly a decade. On May 2, 2011, President Barack Obama announced that U.S. Navy SEALs had conducted a raid on a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, where bin Laden had been hiding. Osama bin Laden was killed in that raid. Nearly 10 years after the attacks he had masterminded, justice had finally come, but the wound remained. Every year on September 11th, America pauses to remember. At Ground Zero in New York, now the site of the National September 11th Memorial and Museum, 2 enormous reflecting pools sit where the Twin Towers once stood. The names of every person who died that day are inscribed around the edges of those pools. Waterfalls flow down into the depths, endlessly, quietly. People will come from around the world to stand at those names and remember. The September 11th Memorial Museum, which opened in 2014, preserves the stories of the victims, the survivors, the first responders, and the recovery. It contains artifacts, fire trucks, twisted steel, personal belongings, that bear witness to both the horror of that day and the courage of those who responded. In Pennsylvania, a national memorial stands at the field in Shanksville where Flight 93 went down. A wall of marble panels lists the names of the 40 passengers and crew who gave their lives to stop a 4th attack. At the Pentagon, a quiet memorial garden with 184 illuminated benches, one for each person killed there, offers a place for reflection. September 11th changed what it means to be American in the 21st century. It changed how the world thinks about terrorism, about security, about the fragility of ordinary life. It launched wars, shaped elections, and influenced foreign policy for a generation. But it also revealed something about the human spirit that no terrorist act can destroy. The capacity for courage, for sacrifice, for community in the face of unimaginable horror. The firefighters who ran up the stairs of burning towers. The passengers who fought back at 30,000 feet. The strangers who pulled each other through broken glass and rubble. The rescue workers who searched through smoke and ash for weeks. The ordinary people who donated blood, fed first responders, and comforted strangers. That is what September 11th also showed the world. September 11th, 2001 began as an ordinary Tuesday morning. It ended as the day that changed everything. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives. Millions more were changed forever. The world was set on a different course, one whose effects we are still living through today. We remember them not just because history demands it, but because they deserve to be remembered. Every name, every face, every story. If this video helped you understand the full history of that day, please like, share, and subscribe. It means more than you know. And if you want to go deeper, let us know in the comments which part of 9/11 history you want us to cover next. Until next time, never forget,